Okay, so now we're trying something different, incorporating my computer and the iPad and reflecting the computer to make the movies. One major reason is now I can use different applications. It's not just EduCreation. This app enables me to do a recording, and if I so choose, I can move myself into the picture, and just as easily, I can move myself out. So, today in class we were talking about the decimals and the place values to the right of the decimal point, and the significance of the place value, and why we deal in tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, because our decimal system is made up of tens. There's 10 ones in a 10, and then 10 tens and 100, and 10 hundreds and 1,000s. And the same thing, if we cut a 1 into 10 parts, we get tenths. If we get tenths into 10 parts, then we get hundredths and thousandths and 10,000ths, and so on. We also mentioned that there's no such thing as a once place, because once are ones. If you think about what we're going to talk about today, is that the place values of our decimals, so our tenths, our hundredths, our thousandths, and our 10,000ths. Okay, these place values are they're going to be the denominators of our decimals, of our fractions, pardon me. These are going to be the denominators of our fractions. Okay, so what we want to do is when we look at a decimal and we want to write as a fraction, what we care about is the place value of the last number. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to give you an example. Okay, so for example, if we're talking about 0.52, what I care about is this place value right here. This is the hundredths place. Okay, and since the number is in the hundredths place, the 100 becomes our denominator. Hello again. So if we were to write this as a fraction, let's move me over here, cut me off a little bit, that's okay. If we write this as a fraction, it's 52, and then the 2 ends up in the hundredths place. There's our denominator, and then our numerator is the rest of the decimal. So it's 52 hundredths. And if I asked you to read that decimal to me, you would read it as 52 hundredths. Okay? So, and then what we could do, and what we should do, is we should simplify it from here. And we say 4 goes into 52 13 times. 4 goes to 100 25 times. So our simplified fraction is 13/25, because we divided top and bottom by 4. Okay? So there's how we go from a decimal to a fraction. We look at the place value of the last number in that decimal, so in this case the 2. It's in the hundredths place, and if we don't remember that, we go back up. We go back up here. Oops, right, and there it is. Go back there, and then hundredths is our second decimal place value to the right, so that becomes our denominator. Let's try another one. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this picture. If it'll let me, it will. I'm going to slide it down. So we can still have it. Oops. On here. Ta-da! Yep. And then let's try another number. Let's try 0.045. Okay? So we read this as 45 thousandths. 45 thousandths, because we have our tenths, our hundredths, and our thousandths place. So we read this as 45 thousandths. And since we read this as 45 thousandths, we write it as 45, and the thousand becomes our denominator. Thousandths. Okay? And then we want to simplify it. Well, 5 goes into 45 9 times, and 5 goes into 1,200 times. And then there's our fraction in simplest form. Okay, so what we can say is that 0.045, or 45 thousandths, is equal to 9 200ths. Okay, so there's another look at taking a decimal and changing it to a fraction. Okay, so what I want you to do now is you should have your workbook page. And if you don't have it, hopefully you downloaded it and printed it from my website. But you want to take the workbook page, and let's see, the page number is 49. So you want to workbook page 49. Okay? Okay. Writing decimals as fractions. And as you can tell, it talks about what was our word of the week last week, which was a terminating decimal. Okay. When you write a terminating decimal as a fraction, what type of denominator do you get? We'll answer that question before we finish up. So a decimal that ends is called a terminating decimal. Okay. And more formally, the definition of a terminating decimal is a decimal where the denominator is 10, 100, 1,000, or a denominator or a fraction that can be written, a decimal that can be written as a fraction where your denominator is a power of 10. Right. So the one way that the book is teaching us to do it is kind of what I said. Read it and write it as you would read it. So there's their example, 0.4. And 0.4 in words is written as 4/10. So as a fraction, we would write it as 4/10. And then if we wanted to, we'd simplify that and say, well, 4/10 equals 2/5. Okay, and then we go further down, and we see 0.15, or in words, 15/100. And 15/100 written as a fraction is 15 over 100. And again, we could simplify that, and we get 3/20. Okay. So when we look at fractions and decimals, they're the exact same number. They're just different ways of writing the same part of a whole. So let's look down, and we're going to complete this table. And one thing we can do, and we'll see, is that when you're ordering numbers on a number line, fractions and decimals, we'll show you how we can convert between the two as soon as we know how to go from a fraction to a decimal. But we can convert between the two to order them from least to greatest. Okay, so the first one, 0.4. Well, if I write that as a fraction, or if I read that, I get 4, and then the place value right here. Okay, the place value right here is the hundredths place. So we would write that as 4/100ths, and then we'd simplify it. I'm going to put it here just for the sake of it. But we would simplify that, and we get 1 over 25. Because 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. Okay? Then we go down to the next one, and we get 0.125. And, what I always do is identify my decimal point, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, so our denominator is 1,000 because that's the place value of the last digit. And then the numerator becomes everything else in the decimal, 125 thousandths. Okay, and I know from my factoring, I can divide top and bottom of each by 25. I know this because 25 will go into 100, which goes into 1,000, and 25 goes into 125. Because if you think about it, 125 is another way of writing $1.25, and there's 5 25-cents. So, anyways, so 125 divided by 25 is 5, and then 1,000 divided by 25. Well, 25 goes into 100 4 times, so it will go to 1000 40 times. And then 5 and 40, I recognize them as factors, as sharing a common factor of 5, and I would get 1/8. Okay, so as a fraction, right, 125 thousandths can be written as 1/8, and 4 tenths, or 4 hundredths, can be written as 1/25. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video for a second. Let's finish the table, and then come back, and we'll check all our work together. So pause now. Great. You're back. So let's go ahead and finish this up. So 0.25 tenths, hundredths, denominator is 100, 25 hundredths, which equals 1/4. Tenths, our denominator is 10, everything else becomes our numerator, 3 tenths. Next one down, tenths. So there's our denominator, 10. Numerator is 5. 5 tenths. I can divide top and bottom by 5. And I get 1/2. Okay, so far we got 25 hundredths, or 1/4, 3 tenths, or 3 tenths, 5 tenths, or 1/2, and we got a couple more. Another 625, again, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Oops, one more 0. Guess what? I can divide top and bottom again by 25. I know the bottom is going to be 40. Don't know what the top's going to be. Well, again, I know 25 goes into 100 4 times. There's 6 of them. 6 times 4 is 24. One more is 25 40ths. Okay? And then again, I can divide top and bottom by 5 eighths, and I get 5/8. So that would be 5/8. And then tenths place, denominator is 10, numerator is 7, 7 tenths. 75 tenths, hundredths, hundredths. Divide top and bottom by 25 again, I get 3/4, or 3/4. And it makes sense because put a dollar sign here, I get 75 cents, or 3/4. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Which is what that fraction says, 3/4 or 3/4. Okay. And the last one, 875 thousandths. One more time. Divide top and bottom by 25. And I get 35 40ths. And then I can go ahead and divide them again by 5. And I get 7/8. 7/8. Okay, so now let's look at the whole table. And believe it or not, to have success in math going forward, you should know the conversion for all these fractions and more, and all their accompanying decimals. Okay? You should be able to look at a decimal like 0.25 and know right away that that's 1/4, or 0.5 and know right away that's 1/2, or 0.75 and know right away that that's 3/4. These other ones, the 1/8, 5/8, 7/8, they'll be a little more tricky, but in time you should know them also. Okay? Alright, last thing I want to talk about now when converting fractions or decimals to fractions is what happens. And by the way, I haven't left yet, but I froze. There I am. So what I want to do now is get out of the way. And what about when you have a mixed number, like 3.45, let's say. Okay, don't forget my decimal point means and. Okay, there's two ways you can handle this. One, you can handle it as a mixed number right off the bat. So when we read a mixed number, we say, for example, this mixed number, we read that as 3 and 1/2. 3, whole number part, and whatever, fraction part. Same thing with this. We read this decimal as 3 and 45 hundredths. And we simplify 45 hundredths, and we get that equal to 3 and 9 20ths. Divide top and bottom by 5. Okay? The other way you can do it is just the same way we did up here in this table. Okay, we determined our last place value, made that a denominator, and then everything else became our numerator. So, tenths, hundredths, 100 is our denominator, and then everything else becomes our numerator, 345. Okay? Now I can look at this, and I can do one of two things. I can simplify it first, or I can change it from mixed to improper. Okay, so let's simplify it first. Divide top and bottom by 5. Okay, and I get 100 divided by 5 is 20. And then 345 divided by 5, not quite sure, so we go off to the side. 345 divided by 5, 5 goes into 34. 6 times 5 is 30. And subtract. I get 45, 0. Yay. Okay, so it'd be 69 20ths. Get all this scratch work out of the way, although it's not a bad thing to show. And then 20 goes into 69 3 times with a remainder of 9 20ths. So either way, you get the same answer. Doesn't matter much which one you use. Either write it as you would read it, 3 and 45 hundredths, or determine our place value. That's our denominator, 100. And then everything else becomes our numerator. This method over here takes a little bit more time, but either one is a valid method. You get the same result. Okay? Alright. So that concludes it. We're going to pick up tomorrow in class and we'll go over some more examples, go over the homework part of it. If you need to, watch again, back up a little bit, watch all of it, doesn't matter. Again, the key though is identify the number, the last number in the decimal, identify that place value. That becomes your denominator. So that's the thousandths place, denominator is 1,000, and the decimal part becomes our numerator, and then simplify. Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I will see you tomorrow in class. There I am again. Oh, there I jumped up, and now I start moving again. Alright, have a good night, and I will see you